d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, Fischer castles, e5, weak. Letelier snapped at the chance to take Fischer out of the book, but premature advance leaves Letelier with all the responsibility of holding his overextended center pawns. Knight e8, f4, d6. On c5, let us go back and see. On c5, d into c5, queen a5, bishop e3, f6, knight f3, f into e5, f into e5, knight c6, bishop e2, knight c7, castles, knight e6, knight d5, queen d8, queen d2. This is played in USSR Championship 1962. Knight bishop 3 is safer, though I can no longer claim any. Fischer's game with Shoshan in the US Junior Championship 1957 continued. D into e5, f into e5, better is d into e5. What played was f into e5, bishop g4, bishop e2, c5, bishop c4, c into d4, queen into d4, queen into d8, rook into d8, soon winning a pawn. Let us go back and see the last move played is bishop e3, c5. Now the artificially constructed white's center begins to crumble. D into e5, knight c6, c into d6. Black rapidly developed his pieces, while white continues his own dream with ill-gotten gains. Instead of c into d6, white tries to compensate for his lack of development by continuing to snatch material. Instead, he should be seeking to return the pawn to the least damaging way by keeping the line closed. Better is knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2. But what is played is c into d6, e into d6, knight e4. More realistic would be knight h3, knight b3 is suggested by another grandmaster who was watching the game, knight f3. Fischer says if he intended to play bishop g4 if knight f3 is played. But after knight e4, bishop f5 is played. After bishop f5, knight g3 is played. But better chances are offered by knight into pawn. Let us go back and see. Knight into knight, queen into d6, queen into d6, e into d6, bishop into b2, rook d1, knight b4, king f2. If knight e2 is played, let us go back and see. Knight e2 is played, bishop c2, rook d2, knight d3 check. After king f2, knight into a2, knight e2. If now instead of knight e2, rook d2 is played. If rook into bishop, knight d3 picks up the rook. Okay, let us go back. After knight e2, a5 is better. Let us go back to the game and see what is played after. Bishop e6. Fischer also considered. Queen c7. Knight into f6. G into f5. But what is played after bishop e6? Knight f3. Queen c7. Also playable is, let us see, d into e5, queen into d8, rook into d8, bishop c5, e into f4. But in the game queen c7 is played. Queen b1, d into e5, f5, e4. This unexpected shot sends white spinning. This was told by Mr. Lombardi, a grandmaster. e4 is a very good move. F into e6. On queen into e4, let us go back and see. On queen into e4, g into f5, knight into f5. Knight into f5 is a bad move. On instead of knight into f5, queen h4, bishop into b2. Let us go back and see to the combination. After knight into f5, queen a5 check. Let us go back. F into e6 was played. E into f3, g into f3, f5, f5 also very good move. f4, the threat was f4, forking both bishop and knight. So f4 is played by Letelier. Knight f6, bishop e2, rook f e8, king f2, rook into e6, rook e1, rook a e8, bishop f3, rook into e3. Rook into e3 is an excellent move. Rook into e3, rook into e3, king into e3, queen into f4 check. This is a excellent move. Letelier didn't expect this. After queen into f4, white resigns. What if king into f2? Knight g4 check. King g2, knight e3 check, king f2, knight d4, queen h1, knight g4 check, king f1, knight into f3. So considering all this, Letelier resigns. Supposing king into f4, bishop h6 mates. That is why king f2 is played. This game is played between Letelier of Chile against Bobby Fischer of USA. Leipzig Olympic 1960. The opening is King's Indian Defense. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe so that you can see beautiful games of Bobby Fischer. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your time.